Sign here." James Chancer's cold, deep voice broke the silence as he slid the divorce papers across the table. Sarah looked up at him, managing a bitter smile. Oh, this was it. No wonder he'd surprisingly called this morning to say he'd be home tonight, wanting to talk. She'd been happy all day, only to find out this was what he wanted to discuss. 3 years of marriage, coming to an end. Sarah Sanders took the papers with trembling hands, her voice barely a whisper. "Do we really have to divorce?" James frowned as he studied the woman who'd been Mrs. Chancer for 3 years. She must have just finished cleaning. Sweat still glistened on her forehead, exhaustion and confusion evident in her eyes behind those thick glasses. Gentle and modest, but utterly plain. This unremarkable woman had been Mrs. Chancer for 3 years. James put out his cigarette, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Just sign it. Charlotte's back, and I don't want her to get the wrong idea." Sarah felt a bitter taste in her mouth. She knew exactly who he meant. Charlotte Garnett, James's first love, the one who got away. For her sake, their marriage had been in name only. For 3 whole years, James had stayed faithful to Charlotte's memory, worried she might refuse. James added coldly, "It's an uncontested divorce. Given your limited education, you'll get the mansion properties and cars. I'll also add $80 million as compensation." They'd only married to please his grandfather, with a prenup in place. What James offered far exceeded what she was entitled to. Though he never cared for her, Sarah had tried her best these 3 years. The extra compensation acknowledged her dedication, especially since she'd need support after divorce. With just a high school diploma, Sarah understood his meaning. After reviewing the papers, she quietly nodded. "All right, I agree." She signed her name smoothly, looking at James through her thick lenses with an expression caught between bitterness and resignation. "Don't worry, I'll move out in a couple of days. I won't get in your way." James nodded. "Thank you for everything these past 3 years." Despite how plain and boring she might be, he had to admit Sarah had been a good wife. She'd taken care of his entire family while he focused on his career, letting him pursue success without worry. But in the end, you can't force love. Sarah found it darkly amusing. After giving him everything, wasting 3 years of her youth, all she got was a simple, "Thank you." James didn't notice her bitter smile as he took the signed papers. His assistant called, and he glanced at her. "I have work at the office. Ask Mrs. Watson's if you need anything." Sarah nodded. As James left the study, his mother anxiously met him in the living room. "How did it go? Did she sign?" James frowned slightly, then nodded. His mother sighed in relief, delighted. "Thank goodness. These past years since you married her, I've never felt at ease. 3 years without a child, always so quiet. Who knows what she was really thinking?" James stayed silent. His mother continued, "I opposed it when your grandfather insisted you marry her. What good could come from an orphan living off the Larson family's charity? Now it's sorted. Once you marry Charlotte, I can finally relax. Only someone like Charlotte deserves you." James's sister Lucy nodded eagerly. "Exactly, brother. Having her as a sister-in-law was embarrassing. Now with Charlotte as my sister-in-law, everyone will be jealous." Sarah listened to the conversation outside the study, her eyes downcast. During her years as James's wife, she had given everything to her mother-in-law and sister-in-law Lucy. When Lucy had her car accident, Sarah had stayed at the hospital for days. She'd always shown nothing but respect and care for Mrs. Chancer. Yet it seemed no amount of devotion could change how the Chancer family saw her. Shortly after, Scarlett Larson called, her voice tired. "Sasa, are you sure you won't come? You used to love hunting outdoors, and you'd get to race cars too." Sarah froze. Memories she'd buried deep came flooding back. Before marrying James, she'd loved hunting, racing cars, and good wine. Then she met James at the Larson estate and fell head over heels. After falling for him, she learned through others that James preferred gentle, trad wife. So she'd gradually given up everything she loved. 3 years had passed, and she'd almost forgotten who she used to be on the other end of the line. Scarlett continued rambling. Sasa, if you don't want James to know, you can keep it from him. There's no need to give up everything for a man. Besides, James, we're getting divorced. Sarah cut her off quietly. Scarlett seemed stunned, then took a deep breath. Did you finally come to your senses, or did James lose his mind? Sarah gave a small laugh. He asked for it. I agreed. Scarlett was speechless, thinking James must be blind. The Chancers should have counted their lucky stars to have someone like Sarah, and now they were divorcing. Congratulations, babe. Scarlett's voice turned excited. I'll pick you up soon. We should celebrate you finally seeing clearly. Sarah hung up with a bitter smile. She looked around the master bedroom, which showed no signs of being shared by a couple. After 3 years of marriage, it might as well have belonged to a single person. It really was time to end this. Sarah went to the guest room to pack her things. She didn't have many clothes. After marriage, she'd stopped caring about her appearance, so packing didn't take long. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the bedside table. Her eyes reflecting a mixture of regret and relief. She pulled her suitcase toward the door. She passed through the living room. She thought she should at least say goodbye to her former mother-in-law, but Lucy's bitter voice cut in first. Someone is finally leaving. Know your place. Hanging around our family all these years just for money. You're nothing but a sparrow trying to fly with the eagles. Sarah stopped in her tracks and, without hesitation, grabbed the glass of water from the table and threw it in Lucy's face. Drenched from head to toe, Lucy exploded. Sarah, have you lost your mind? How dare you? Sarah calmly wiped the water droplets from her fingers and replied coolly, I dare plenty. I might be a sparrow, but I still have claws. Lucy stood there speechless, clearly shocked that this was the same Sarah everyone had pushed around. Sarah found Lucy's surprise amusing. For 3 years, no matter how harsh Lucy and Mrs. Chancer had been, she'd done everything perfectly to please them without complaint. She'd always been gentle and patient, quietly enduring their bitter words and anger. They'd forgotten that before all this, Sarah had been wild and free, drinking, fighting, and living life on her own terms. She'd put up with enough. No more. Sarah let out a soft chuckle. Sarah left the Chancer mansion without looking back, wheeling her suitcase behind her. Outside, she found Scarlett leaning out of her car window, blowing her a playful kiss. Get in, baby. Time to celebrate. Though Scarlett called it a celebration, knowing Sarah was freshly divorced and likely down, she just took her to a music-themed restaurant. When she heard James's reason for the divorce, Scarlett couldn't help but scoff. Charlotte Garnett again. What's so special about her that James is this obsessed? Sarah stirred her coffee listlessly. No idea. She'd never actually met James's dream woman. Charlotte had already left for abroad when Sarah first met James. She'd only heard that Charlotte was gentle, accomplished, and understanding. When James had fought with his grandfather over her, Charlotte had been mature enough to convince James to let it go, which had led to Sarah's arranged marriage with James. Seeing Sarah's reluctance to discuss it further, Scarlett changed the subject, resting her chin on her hand. Well, at least James was generous. Houses, cars, and 80 million. She glanced at Sarah and sighed. Though I suppose you don't need any of it. After Sarah's father died, she'd handed the company management to her cousin Melvin Sanders, content to live off the dividends. Everyone assumed the company belonged to Melvin now, and with the prenup between Sarah and James, her family thought she had nothing left. You can never have too much money, Sarah replied absently, looking at her friend's plain and boring appearance. Scarlett felt a pang of sympathy. That's right. Buy yourself some nice clothes and bags, show the Chancers what they're missing. But what are you planning to do now? Sarah's gaze grew distant. She had double majored in psychology and music in college, but had to take a break when her father passed away. Then came 3 years as a housewife. She had never thought about what would come next. Scarlett squeezed her hand. No rush. Take your time figuring it out. For now, let's go shopping, and in a few days, I'll take you hunting up the mountains. She winked excitedly. And guess what? Zachary Reynolds will be there too. Sarah raised an eyebrow in surprise. Zachary Reynolds, the mysterious third son of the real estate empire, wasn't known for joining such events. But her curiosity quickly faded. After lunch, Sarah wasn't in the mood for shopping. She just handed over her card and had the staff deliver everything Scarlett picked to her apartment. Before leaving, Scarlett suddenly remembered something. Oh, Sasa, I know you've been busy, but Professor Wells hasn't been well lately. You should visit him when you can. Professor Wells had been Sarah's psychology mentor in college. She made a mental note to visit him as she headed back to her apartment. After leaving the Chancers, Sarah had moved into a small apartment near Scarlett's place. It was regularly maintained, making it perfect for temporary accommodation, but as she approached the building, she spotted James leaning against his car, waiting. A woman sat in the passenger seat, delicate features, gentle eyes, the perfect picture of feminine grace. Sarah glanced at her sideways. She could see why James would fall for someone like that. The woman stepped out of the car and walked over with James, her arm linked through his. With a warm, gracious smile, she extended her hand. Hello, Sarah. I'm Charlotte Garnett. Sarah stopped in her tracks. Her expression remained calm, but she didn't take Charlotte's offered hand. As Charlotte's smile faltered, James stepped in to ease the tension. Grandfather heard about us, he said in a deep and restrained voice. He wants you to join us for dinner tonight. Your phone was off, so I came to get you. I see. Sarah checked her phone. It was indeed dead. She nodded. I'll charge it and join you later. The message was clear. She wouldn't be going with them. James frowned. I can wait while you dash. No need. Sarah cut him off with a smile. I'll make my own way there. When he fell silent, Sarah glanced at Charlotte. And tomorrow at 9, if you're free, let's get the divorce papers finalized. For some reason, James felt unsettled. Why the rush? Sarah nodded firmly. 'Cause it's urgent. James was taken aback, his expression darkening as he led Charlotte away. After a few steps, Charlotte whispered something intimately to James, then turned back to Sarah, her eyes gentle. Miss Sanders, I owe you my thanks. For what? Charlotte glanced back at James waiting in the distance, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her smile was sweet with nostalgia and gratitude. When James and I separated years ago, it was just bad timing. When I returned, I thought we'd lost our chance. I know how much you loved him. If you hadn't been so understanding, we might never have gotten back together. You're wrong. Sarah met her eyes. I'm not divorcing him to bring you two together. I'm not that selfless. I'm divorcing him because I don't want to love him, and I won't anymore. She'd spent 3 years trying to be the perfect Mrs. Chancer and failed. In that time, she probably had better odds winning the lottery than making James love her. Why keep forcing it? The moment she decided on divorce, she knew she had to let go. Yes, she'd done everything for James, only to have him bring another woman to her doorstep. But Sarah had no regrets. Charlotte stood speechless. Sarah considered for a moment, then added coldly, whatever happens between you two is none of my business anymore. Dinner was set for 8:30. Sarah reached her apartment just after 7. Maybe it was the relief of leaving the Chancers, but Sarah felt unusually light. After a shower, she put her phone on charge. There was still plenty of time. For the first time in ages, she picked out a rose-red dress she loved, switched to contact lenses, and put on makeup. She'd never done this at the Chancers. When she first married James, she used to wear makeup, but his mother said it was too flashy for a proper wife. James never bothered to look at her anyway. Now she could do as she pleased. After getting ready, she took a cab to the Chancer family estate. This way, Mrs. Chancer, the butler said, eyeing her transformation with surprise but maintaining his usual respect. That he was still using her married name told Sarah that Richard Chancer, James's grandfather, wasn't ready to accept the divorce. She was right. At the dinner table sat James and Charlotte, with Richard's face dark with disapproval, the atmosphere thick with tension. Seeing her, his expression softened. "Sasa, come," Richard said warmly. "It's been too long since you've had dinner with me." James looked up instinctively, his gaze falling on Sarah. Something stirred in him. Without her glasses, her almond-shaped eyes were striking, with their subtle upward tilt and gleaming with an inner light. Combined with her rose-red dress, she looked alluring and confident, nothing like the meek, compliant woman he thought he knew. Lost in his thoughts, James felt a warm hand on his. He turned to see Charlotte looking at him with concern. "Are you feeling okay? Would you like some soup?" James shook his head. After greeting Richard, Sarah quietly took her seat, pointedly ignoring their interaction. Richard let out a scoff of disgust. Dinner at the Chancers was traditionally eaten in silence. Sarah had little appetite but picked at her food to be polite. After dinner, Richard held her back. "I've heard about you and James. Don't worry, Sarah. You're the only daughter-in-law this family recognizes." He cast a cold look at Charlotte and James, their faces stiffening at his words. If anyone should leave this family, it should be the homewrecker, and this excuse for a man. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. James's jaw tightened. Beside him, Charlotte clutched his hand, her eyes filling with tears, looking every bit the victim. Richard ignored them both, drumming his fingers on the table with a sigh. "Your father and I were close friends despite our age difference. Having you join our family brought me such joy. How can I face your father if we let you go now?" James massaged his temples. "Grandfather, I'll make sure Sarah is taken care of." "You can't force love," Richard's temper flared. "Force love? You're blind. Just look at who you've chosen." "Grandfather," seeing the argument brewing, Sarah intervened softly. "It wasn't his decision. Grandfather, I wanted the divorce too." Her words dropped like a stone into still water. Sarah poured Richard a glass of water, waiting for him to take a sip before continuing quietly. "Please don't worry about me. I'm not sacrificing anything. Every decision has been my own. I want this divorce because I simply don't love him anymore." Her face was peaceful, like someone who'd finally found freedom, carrying a strange sort of serenity. James stared at her profile in the soft lighting, his expression darkening. After a long silence, Richard spoke heavily. "Our family has failed you." Sarah paused, then smiled without responding. Seeing Richard had calmed, she made her excuses to leave. Given the late hour, Richard nodded, muttering as she walked away, "Better off divorced. Better than staying with this fool." With a final sigh, Richard retreated to his study without a glance at his grandson. James's expression grew stonier. "Go comfort your grandfather," Charlotte said softly. "He's always been fond of Sarah. He must be taking this hard." Ever the peacemaker, Charlotte prompted James, who squeezed her hand. "Let me drive you home first." After dropping Charlotte off, James found his grandfather brooding over tea in his study. He sat down to help, pouring a cup as he spoke with resignation. "Grandfather, Charlotte will be my future wife. Even if you don't like her, please try to be kind to her." Richard let out a disdainful laugh. "Funny, that's exactly what I told you when Sarah married into this family. She's your wife. Even if you don't love her, treat her well." "And what did you do?" Richard slammed his teacup down, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Since the day she joined this family, your mother has done nothing but tear her down. Every time she got sick, she had to handle it alone. Whenever Lucy wanted the latest designer bag or jewelry, Sarah was the one footing the bill. Night after night, she'd wait up for you, keeping your dinner warm. And that time you made yourself sick pining over Charlotte? Sarah spent hours making you homemade soup, burning her hands raw in the process." He sighed deeply. "Even when she lost her father and lived with the Larsons, she never had to do any of that. James, Sarah gave you everything. Charlotte brings you one bowl of soup, and suddenly she's the perfect woman. James's fists clenched as he listened, his eyes darkening like storm clouds. Sarah knew nothing of this conversation. For once, she slept well that night. The next morning at 8:30, she called James about finalizing the divorce. "Mr. Chancer, if you're available, could you meet me at the courthouse at 9? I'll be waiting outside." "I have a meeting," James replied flatly. "Let's handle it another day." He hung up before she could respond. Sarah stood there, stunned. She distinctly remembered reminding him yesterday. Important people, busy schedules. After a moment's hesitation, she decided not to call back. The great Mr. Chancer could sort it out when he had time. On her way back, she remembered Scarlett mentioning Professor Wells's condition and decided to give him a call about visiting the Wells residence. The housekeeper led Sarah to the study. Before she could enter, she heard Professor Wells speaking. "Zach, regarding your sister's case, I wish I could help. But psychological treatment requires consistency, and in my current condition, I'm afraid I'd do more harm than good." Sarah paused as a deep, gentle voice replied, "Your health comes first. If you could recommend someone suitable, I'd be grateful." Just as Professor Wells nodded, the housekeeper knocked and opened the door. "Sir, Miss Sanders is here." "Sarah." Professor Wells brightened. "Come in." Sarah looked up, finally seeing the man who'd been speaking. Her breath caught. He had the kind of presence that filled a room, classically handsome with an air of quiet authority. His chiseled features and enigmatic blue eyes conveyed both sophistication and an underlying intensity. Even standing casually in the corner, he drew attention while appearing completely at ease, like an expertly placed piece of art. Noting her arrival, he smoothly excused himself. "I'll visit another time." Sarah's interest was piqued, though she had already guessed his identity. Sure enough, she heard Professor Wells speaking softly. "It's a difficult situation for the Reynolds. If his sister's condition doesn't improve," just as she thought. Zachary Reynolds, the well-known third son of the Reynolds empire, the Reynolds family dominated the real estate market on the East Coast. Their recent meteoric rise attributed to their CEO, Zachary. The business world buzzed with stories of his brilliance and ruthless deal-making, though he carefully avoided the spotlight. Everyone wanted to know more about the man behind the success. Sarah hadn't expected to run into him here. She remembered Scarlett mentioning he'd be at tomorrow's hunting event. Looking at him, he seemed an unlikely participant in such activities. Meanwhile, Professor Wells, hearing about her divorce, felt a mix of emotions. Sarah had been his star student in college before marrying young and abandoning her studies in psychology. He'd always regretted that. Seeing her now, divorced but unbroken, brought him relief. "You were my most promising psychology student," he said. "If not for the interruption, you might have made significant contributions to the field. Now that you have time, have you considered returning to psychology?" Sarah's eyelashes fluttered as she considered Professor Wells's words. If she hadn't married James, she would have become a practicing therapist by now. Even though her knowledge was still intact, could she really return to her field after all these years? Professor Wells sensed her hesitation. "There's no rush," he said kindly. "But if you're interested, I'm here to help." "Thank you, Professor." Sarah felt a wave of warmth. Despite her absence these past years, he still cared about his former student. After discussing his health and chatting for a while longer, he even invited her to stay for lunch. It was late afternoon by the time she left. With tomorrow's hunting trip in mind, she picked up her prepared gear and clothing. The next morning, Scarlett picked her up and drove them to the mountain lodge. They arrived early, finding only a few unfamiliar faces. Since the Reynolds family was hosting the event, it had drawn quite a mixed crowd. Sarah wasn't in the mood for small talk, so she headed straight inside to change and select her rifle. As she was about to leave the lodge, she heard a familiar voice. "James, Charlotte. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought this wasn't your kind of thing." Charlotte heard the game hunting was good here. "Thought we'd check it out." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door to find James's friend greeting the couple enthusiastically. Seeing her, he blurted out, "Sarah, what are you doing here?" He immediately regretted it, watching James's face darken. Sarah had pulled her hair back and wore no makeup. Without her glasses, wearing contacts instead, she stood in fitted hunting gear that gave her an air of confident competence. James had never seen her like this. His brow furrowed. "What are you doing here?" Scarlett, now changed into her own gear, shot James a withering look. "What's the problem? You can parade around with your side piece, but Sarah can't come here to change her mood." James didn't mean it like that. Charlotte interjected smoothly. "It's just, they're divorced now. For Sarah to show up here, not knowing how to hunt, clearly following James, it's a bit inappropriate, don't you think?" As Charlotte spoke, not only did James's expression turn disgusted, but whispers spread through the crowd. The other wealthy guests, all somewhat familiar with James and Sarah's situation, were drawing their own conclusions. James had never publicly acknowledged Sarah during their marriage, and now here she was, seemingly stalking him after their divorce. It looked desperate. Scarlett exploded. "Listen here, you little dash." Sarah caught her arm, holding her back. She turned to Charlotte and James with a cool smile. "You've got it wrong. I'm here to hunt." She loaded her rifle with practiced ease, her tone casual but sharp. "Not only can I hunt, I'm quite good at it. If you don't believe me, just watch." Suddenly, the crowd fell silent except for approaching footsteps. Zachary walked toward them, a smile playing on his lips. He took a state-of-the-art rifle from one of his staff and offered it to Sarah. "The latest model. I'm looking forward to seeing your skills, Miss Sanders." His blue eyes held an intensity that matched his enigmatic smile, both captivating and dangerous.